Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so this is my second video on Sarah Boone. Okay, as we know, Sarah Boone has been charged with second-degree murder in Florida, okay, for the so-called suitcase murder, okay? And this is the case where basically she and her partner were messing around in her apartment, and somehow her partner got into a suitcase, and it would appear as though, this hasn't been proven yet, but it would appear as though she actually tossed the suitcase down the staircase while he was in it, and got him into a very uncomfortable position where he was actually injured and couldn't breathe. Okay. And he was begging to get out of the suitcase. And Sarah Boone was basically just telling him to go fuck off and, just kind of taunting him, and just left him there. And she went upstairs and went to sleep and left him to die basically in the suitcase. So um, this may, in truth, the truth that we'll never know, because we'll never know the whole truth, but in truth, this may be a premeditated murder case. However, I think Florida has been very smart and very wise not to overcharge it, and they're just going to go with second degree murder because that's easier to prove, and it gives her less room to sort of manufacture reasonable doubt. So I think second degree murder is a good charge for this case. But the reason why I want to talk about this case, and the reason why I talk about true crime cases, I try to showcase the angle for those of us who are struggling with cluster B issues in our lives. People who have any issue with behavior, just behavior issues, maybe anger management, addictions, or even cluster B issues. Issues with actual narcissism or with borderline issues. Um, I think recovery is possible, but I think at first we have to understand, I believe, what really is the root cause of this family of personality issues and behavior problems. Okay, and so when I look at these true crime cases, I mean, it is fascinating and it's entertaining, but also I think there's a lot that all of us can learn, and I think every human being, all of us can improve our behavior and our integrity to some extent. So there's a lot to learn. These are the extreme cases, obviously, but I think everybody in our own way, all of us in our own way, we can learn something from these cases. Um, Here in this case, Sarah Boone, as I mentioned in the earlier video, the part one, I think she's spectacular cluster B symptoms. She has spectacular cluster B features: super manipulative, super arrogant, super entitled, super self-absorbed, super inappropriate. Here she is, she has a partner that's dead, and she doesn't show in her affect and in her attitude any respect for how serious and how terrible that is. I mean, she's concerned about getting a glass of water, whether she can smoke her cigarettes. She starts bickering over just minutia and just little fine, just being a smartass basically with the cops, and just doesn't show any attunement to the actual any congruence with the actual seriousness and the nature of the situation that she was in. Even towards the end of her interrogation, she was kind of acting as though, oh my God, am I really getting arrested? Like, just really out of it. Um, so clearly we have somebody who is not really sitting and nested in the full wholeness of reality. She's obviously dealing with kind of like a filtered reality, and her behavior is very classically narcissistic, at least in some ways. I mean, she has also some manipulation. I think it's more typical of probably a borderline. And obviously, she's an alcoholic. She acts like she doesn't like to drink a lot. She has, I think, probably serious alcohol issues, based on the testimony, based on the interviews with her ex-husband. Sorry, her ex-husband basically talked about how she had no control over her alcohol use. So this is a person who's solid cluster B. Okay, solid cluster B. But what do I want to talk about here? Here I want to talk about a way of thinking of cluster B issues. Okay, the way I think of cluster B and basically the whole narcissistic family of disorders, including to some extent addictions. Okay, I think what we find at the root of these issues is basically a fundamental difficulty in tolerating irritation and frustration and discomfort in life. Okay. When a person has basically no ability to tolerate discomfort and irritation, okay, from a very young age, okay, that's going to cause a lot of problems, I think, with how we can integrate different parts of ourselves. Okay. I just happen to believe that sort of like the central secret, I guess, to having all of our personalities sort of integrated in one trunk is having the ability to tolerate basic frustration and dissonance, okay, and even discomfort, because it's only with that tolerance of frustration that you can tolerate sort of the natural realities of having to control one's behavior, and also having to process the fact that we can have conflict internally. Okay. In other words, I might want to do something, but on the other hand, there's other considerations that maybe it's not so wise to do something. So every time I entertain even the smallest decision as far as my behavior, there are actually many, many different considerations that have to sit at the same time inside myself that can cause a little bit of tension and conflict. Like, I want to eat a hamburger at 11 p.m., but I know that if I eat that hamburger, I'm going to feel like crap in the morning. Those are simple examples, but throughout life, we're presented with lots of examples. Like, say, if you're a teenager and you have really like a raving sexuality, okay, just the discomfort of knowing you just can't be a savage and just go, express your sexuality. You have to sort of somehow act like a civilized person, but at the same time, you have a part of yourself that's not civilized. That actually requires a lot of mental stamina to hold all that together. And those of us who don't hold it all together, okay, what we're going to end up doing is having a little bit of kind of dissociation, where that aspect of ourselves is not centrally integrated into our, like, say, the core executive functioning of our personality. And so you end up with kind of like satellite aspects, okay, or basically sort of like the elements of our personality are not housed in a central container, basically. Okay. And so basically what happens with cluster B then is that the native talents that we have are our native, like, witchcraft talents almost. I say witchcraft just because I think humans have a lot of ancient inherited, sort of like intelligences inside of us, like the ability to be persuasive, the ability to be manipulative, all those things. We inherit those things. I think those are like part of those are part of, like, say, the endowment of the human that comes from thousands of years. And I think that deserves to be called witchcraft, because it is kind of crafty, and it does have a lot to do with influencing other people, and how you make other people feel. So I think that is kind of, in a sense, what witchcraft really is. Um, but in any case, we have like these native intelligence, like independent intelligence elements in us. But if we don't have that central executive, okay, and if we don't have the ability to tolerate the frustration to hold things in the executive space, okay, then what we end up with is a super immature center, which is the pathological part. And then our talents and our native witchcraft geniuses almost, they sort of run independently and without executive control. So basically, you could think of cluster B as a combination of talent with no executive control. Okay, that's just one way to look at it. And I think this case of Sarah Boone, we see that she has, in her own way, I know a lot of people don't buy any of her bullshit, but in her own way, she has pretty sophisticated manipulation. Okay, and she has pretty a formidable talent in being able to take a situation that is a terrible situation, and sort of not acknowledging and sort of not seeing, the full terribleness of it, and sort of reformulating it and sort of casting like arguments, to sort of make her look like she's not so guilty or whatever. And I think, given the situation she was in and given how bad the evidence was, I think she showed that she has some real talent, compared to an average person, let's say. And she really is an effective manipulator. And she really does have the ability to sort of like, see things from different points of view and sort of present things from, a different way. And even to the point of being deceptive, of course. But there's a certain intelligence in doing that. Okay. But the reason why I want to make this video is that just because you have intelligence and talent, that doesn't mean you have any executive integration. Okay. And when we don't have executive integration, let's be honest, you don't really have a central competency. Okay. And you really don't have, a full sobriety. Okay. In other words, you cannot compare somebody who has a developed central executive. Okay, you cannot compare that person to another person who has no central executive, and their separate talents are running the show. You can't compare that, because the other person has a huge advantage that they have an extra central executive development, which can really, really add a whole layer of control over behavior and judgment and the way we even think and process information. Okay, so in a sense, even though you have talents, and even though you're an expert manipulator, and you've got all these almost genius elements and qualities to your personality, you may still have a severely diminished capacity to regulate your behavior. Okay, so while the law will still hold you accountable for your behavior, in all truth, you don't really have the full package. You don't have the full package of what could be a much more comprehensive control over your behavior. Okay, so I think Sarah Boone is a classic example, because even though lots of people are not going to buy any of her manipulations. Okay, so she's not like major league, like she's not like world class. But I think compared to average people, I think she has some level of sophistication in her ability to sort of act as though there's not a problem when there is a problem. That's a powerful skill, actually, and that's a talent. And it takes a lot of, I guess you have to be born with that. And she's able to sort of like change points of view and argue and kind of be manipulative, and sort of even use that thing where she makes herself look like she's like kind of grandiose, and making other people look like maybe they're not as smart as she is or whatever. And so she has a lot of tools in her toolbox to sort of be effective in arguing with people, and maybe be persuasive in a very stressful situation. So she has these talents. Okay, but what she's missing is the central executive, which actually recognizes the reality of situations, takes on the discomfort of a real life situation, and being congruent with her actual circumstances, and doesn't just deploy randomly all of her talents, but also kind of oversees those things. And basically what you see is a person whose independent geniuses are sort of running the show, but with no central executive. Okay, and I think that that's consistent with what her ex-husband said about her behavior, that he had to get a divorce from her because basically she couldn't control her drinking. When she started drinking, she'd stay out till 3 a.m, and even though she was married, she would have like strange men coming over to the house, and it just became unworkable. So she almost became to a point where, when alcohol got in the picture, she was almost acting like an antisocial person. Okay, basically complete behavior dysregulation. Okay, and then we also see that in the interrogation, when she had to, she could try to fluff her feathers and sort of make herself appear and really believe herself to be like a much more sophisticated and a much more upstanding person than the circumstances really demonstrated. So this is a really fascinating case. And I think if there's any lesson to be learned from it, I think, is it just reminds us that we're very complex. Okay, we're very complex. And even if you don't have one sort of like element or one aspect of your personality, you can still have other aspects. And some of those aspects can have their own independent intelligence, talent, and even genius. Okay. And so it's just because a person has like genius qualities and genius sort of components, like say the ability to argue, the ability to make people feel inferior, the ability to act as though there's no problem when there really is a problem, which are really talents. Okay. Even though you have those talents and you have those skills, so to speak, that doesn't necessarily mean you have a central sobriety. Okay. That doesn't necessarily mean you have the necessary holding space, okay, to hold all those things and your circumstances together, which requires the ability to hold discomfort and irritation. Okay. Just because you have those talents on the outside, that doesn't mean you have a central executive. Okay. And so even though you may appear to be very savvy and very tricky and very intelligent and very almost like scheming and very knowing in a way, you don't have that central oversight, which is the true sobriety, okay, or the final sobriety, the essential central sobriety. And that a person like that will not have the same control in their life that a person will have if they have a more central integration. Okay. And so, we should not be afraid to say that you can have talents, you can have even witchcraft, you can have, and I think it is kind of witchcraft. You can have genius, even elements of genius, and yet you don't really have sobriety in terms of central executive. Okay. And in my opinion, when it comes to all these cluster B issues, I think the central executive, a very core aspect, is the ability to tolerate irritation, conflict, and irreconcilables, just to be able to hold things that are uncomfortable psychologically, especially things that are not flattering to yourself or things that are just challenging, that don't make you look good, just the strain of having to deal with whatever the circumstances present in life. Okay. And if you don't have that ability to tolerate and hold uncomfortable feelings, there's no place to actually integrate all these aspects of the personality, and so you end up with a fragmented personality where the fragmented elements may have their own independent intelligence and their own independent talent, but there's no central executive. Okay. And so that to me is an impaired capacity. All right. It's not to say that people aren't accountable. People are accountable. I mean, the law says people are accountable, and people should be accountable. People, even though they may have talent, and even though they may have, like, say, a missing executive, there should still be, like, say, the accountability that people should strive to look inside themselves, and, like, we should all be looking inside ourselves and say, is there something missing? Because the law holds me to a very high standard. And if it's known publicly and it's open that we're all held to a fairly high standard, even if we feel competent, we should always have that extra questioning, like, am I really so competent? To really dig in, to really question ourselves. Okay. Because maybe it is fair philosophically for us all to be held to a high standard, even if we all don't really meet that standard. Okay. Because that'll force us maybe to question ourselves and to say, maybe I just need to just cool down, because I don't even know what my level of competency is, even despite having my talents. And maybe there are some things to learn in life, like about, tolerating irritation, discomfort, just tolerating conflict, learning to live with just being uncomfortable, learning to live with irritation. Okay. And not only that, but actually adapting ourselves to be able to take on, let's say, more responsibility, more, like, say, less pleasure, maybe when we really want to do something, maybe not doing it, and just learning how to metabolize discomfort as sort of like a central bedrock, as creating a space where we can start to develop what would actually be the executive part of us, and that part of us really can't exist if there's no space for it, basically. So when I look at Sarah Boone, I can see she has talents. I can see she even has almost uncanny talents. Now, she wouldn't fool me. I'll be honest, she wouldn't fool me. But I can see how you have to almost, like, struggle to kind of, like, keep your balance with her, because she really does almost kind of try to, she almost does sort of infect you with her talent. Like acting like there's not really a problem, or maybe, she's not, what she did wasn't really so bad, or whatever. Basically just being very dishonest, but through very effective manipulations. Okay. And so I think that's a classic example of how a person can have, really almost amazing talents, but really missing a very central aspect. Okay. And that all of us who are interested, let's say, in recovering or being better people, maybe it's nice to have talents, and it's good to have talents, but maybe not always rely on our talents. Okay. And sometimes look in the center and say, hey, how much more discomfort can I train myself to tolerate? How much more, let's say, not having pleasure can I sort of endure through life? Maybe even welcoming the frustration and the lack of pleasure of not being able to indulge in all the things. And what would happen if I carried discomfort as sort of like an enduring baseline? Okay. Because maybe as we metabolize the discomfort of a responsible life, we might actually be developing the trunk of a central executive housing that can be the trunk of the tree of a more noble personality. You know what I mean? So these are things to think about. Sorry for the dogs over there. They're not my dogs. Anyway, but I just encourage people to be open that not everything you see in a cluster B person is just pathology. Okay, I think it's a mixture of pathology and talent. And sometimes the most dangerous thing is when you mix talent with a lack of executive maturity. You know what I mean? It's almost like the few talents that we do have, they can actually get us into a lot of trouble. Okay. Or, it's a combination of talents and impulses. But in this case, with Sarah Boone, we can see she does have some talents combined with a shocking, jaw-dropping, spectacular lack of behavioral control. So anyway, I hope this video has been helpful, and I appreciate you guys watching, and the best to everyone. Thank you.